You feel the crown press heavy against your skull, cold as cursed iron, and yet your blood runs thin, like a river drying in secret. Gold gleams for every eye to see, but within you fragility beats like a war drum. No army can protect you from this truth. Kingdoms are built on swords, yet they collapse from a cough, a fever, a single drop of cursed blood. The court surrounds you with reverence and perfumes, but you smell what they deny, the sour stench of illness prowling like an invisible specter. What use is power, if the flesh that carries it rots in silence? What is a dynasty but an artery too fragile, ready to burst at the slightest strike of fate? Every banquet, every celebration, hides a fear buried beneath forced smiles. The certainty that a cold can become a sentence, that a tremor in the hand can announce the fall of an entire bloodline. The world believes in the immortality of crowns, but you know the truth. Weakness runs in the blood, and blood cannot be deceived. And it is there that the true tragedy begins. Because the cruelest enemy carries no sword, only silence. You walk through corridors lined with silk and marble, yet the air feels thick, heavy with the rasp of hidden lungs. The cough of a servant lingers like a dagger drawn in secret. The shiver of a child echoes louder than a trumpet of war. Disease does not storm the gates. It slips beneath them, silent, patient, merciless. No assassin dares raise a blade in the throne room, yet the executioner is already present, unseen, untouchable, already marking names in a book of shadows. The courtiers bow, their jewels clinking like chains, but behind the glitter lies dread. They know the truth, though none will speak it. Poison in the chalice is less feared than fever in the blood. Because a sword kills once. Illness kills slowly, stripping dignity, peeling power away layer by layer until nothing remains but weakness laid bare. Palaces echo not with music, but with muffled prayers, with doctors whispering failures in candlelit chambers. And in every dynasty, the question spreads like smoke. Who will be the next to fall? And how soon will the crown itself tremble? The crown was never carried by one head alone. It was carried in the veins, passed down like a fragile relic of flesh. You feel it now, the tremor that does not belong only to you but to generations buried in silence. Hemophilia, weak hearts, brittle bones, curses whispered through bloodlines, cloaked in titles too proud to admit fragility. In public, they paraded as divine, untouchable. Yet in hidden chambers, bandages soaked red, fevers burned through royal beds, and shame spread faster than the illness itself. For how could the rulers of nations confess that their bodies were crumbling from within? Every portrait painted, every crown polished, was an attempt to mask the truth, that behind the veil of majesty lay veins as thin as glass, hearts as fragile as a candle flame. Secrecy became the greatest inheritance. Silence became law. And beneath that silence, fear bloomed, fear that one mistake of the blood could topple an empire. You begin to wonder, was it really power they inherited, or the chaos of their own decay? In Spain, the throne once trembled not from foreign cannons, but from the fragile veins of a single boy. You see him in your mind, a prince whose skin became parchment for his curse, where bruises bloomed like spilled ink and every stumble left purple constellations across his body. A simple cut, harmless to others, became a prophecy of death for him. Wounds refused to close, as if his own blood mocked the crown he was meant to wear. Imagine the irony, a child destined to command legions, yet undone by the weight of his own body. Ministers whispered in corridors, queens wept behind locked doors, and every accident became a matter of state. A fall from a horse could ripple into political collapse. A bruise on the prince's arm could decide treaties, wars, alliances. The empire stretched across oceans, banners rising over conquered lands, but in the royal bedchamber all victories dissolved into fear. What use are armies, when a kingdom's heir can be unmade by a nosebleed? And so Spain learned the cruelest truth. Blood may crown a dynasty, but it can also drown it. In France, the sickness did not spill from wounds but from the mind itself. You walk the mirrored halls of Versailles, golden walls that seemed to whisper back the thoughts of kings unraveling. Behind the glittering chandeliers, madness stirred, paranoia coiled in royal veins, hallucinations blooming like black flowers in the silence of night. Servants spoke in hushed tones of rulers who trembled at shadows, who mistook loyal courtiers for assassins, who wept without reason beneath ceilings painted with divinity. The court disguised it with silk and ceremony, but no tapestry could cover the cracks spreading through the mind of a monarch. What happens when a king, believed to embody the will of God, becomes prisoner to visions only he can see? The crown gleamed, but the man beneath it fractured, his authority dissolving into whispers of instability. In Versailles, power and madness danced together, inseparable, each step a reminder that the throne was as fragile as the mind that held it. And from these gilded shadows, a darker question emerged. Was monarchy itself a kind of madness, dressed in jewels to mask its decay? In Russia, the empire's survival pulsed inside the frail body of a child. The Tsarevich Alexei, heir to the Romanovs, carried in his veins not strength but a quiet catastrophe. You see him, pale, trembling, his legs wrapped in bandages, his skin a map of darkening bruises. Each fall, each stumble, became an act of terror. His childhood was not measured in play, but in the silence that followed every cry, as courtiers held their breath, listening for the sound of bleeding within. Hemophilia made his body a battlefield, and the empire his hostage. Ministers debated wars, borders, revolutions, yet everything bent to the fragile rhythm of Alexei's blood. A nosebleed could stop councils. A bruise could unmake treaties. His body was the metronome of an empire slowly collapsing. And into this desperation stepped Rasputin, a figure wrapped in filth and prophecy, his eyes promising what medicine could not. To the Tsarina, he became more than a man. He was a lifeline, a grotesque hope that perhaps God still listened. Every whispered prayer over the boy's sickbed, every touch of Rasputin's hand, bound the dynasty tighter to its own doom. For in the end, Russia was not ruled by the Tsar alone, but by the fragile blood of a boy and the shadow of the man who claimed to heal him. The Spanish flu crept into palaces as easily as it did into hovels, stripping away the illusion that crowns offered protection. You hear it in the muffled chambers, the coughs of monarchs hidden behind curtains of silk, their fevers no different from the fevers of peasants dying in crowded streets. The pandemic made no distinction between beggar and king. It leveled them all beneath the same invisible hand. Servants whispered as sovereigns gasped for air, their jeweled fingers clutching at sheets already damp with sweat. The perfumes of court could not mask the sour scent of sickness, nor could prayers drown out the rattle of lungs closing in on themselves. For once, power was irrelevant. Gold could not bribe the virus. Guards could not keep it from entering the bedchamber. And so monarchs discovered what their subjects had always known, that death does not kneel, not even before a throne. In the wake of the flu, a silence lingered, the kind that comes when an empire realizes its rulers are made of nothing more than fragile flesh. In England, it was not the sword but the slow gnaw of tuberculosis that haunted the throne. You picture it, pale princes and princesses paraded in gilded carriages, their faces powdered to conceal the hollow beneath their eyes. Behind the grandeur of processions, lungs were unraveling in silence. In hidden chambers, lace handkerchiefs bloomed with crimson stains, delicate fabric turned into a record of decay. The sound of coughing echoed through palaces like a secret tolling bell, each spasm a reminder that majesty could not shield the body from collapse. Physicians whispered of consumption, a word spoken softly, as though naming it too loudly might hasten its work. The court clung to rituals of elegance, but elegance became grotesque when paired with the rattle of breath, the trembling of a body too weak to hold its crown. And so tuberculosis became England's shadow, an illness draped in velvet, stalking heirs and queens alike, leaving behind not triumph, but the pale beauty of slow ruin. In the hidden chambers of Europe's courts, another plague crept, not carried by bloodlines, but by desire. Syphilis, the disease no monarch dared to name, spread like a phantom beneath embroidered sheets. You feel the weight of its secrecy, Courtiers avoiding mirrors as sores bloomed, rulers hiding tremors in their hands while decrees were signed with fingers already rotting. It was the grotesque irony of pleasure turned into decay. Nights of indulgence became mornings of shame, as flesh betrayed the very bodies that once commanded nations. Physicians whispered of the French disease, of the great pox, but never dared speak its true name before the throne. To confess was to unravel majesty itself. Behind the curtains of power, bandages covered ulcers, wigs concealed hair that had fallen away, and perfumes tried to mask the sickly sweetness of infected skin. The court danced, smiled, prayed, but beneath every gesture lingered the fear that desire had already marked them for ruin. Syphilis was monarchy's unspoken rut, the silent executioner born of its own excess. And in the shadows of every palace, the question burned: how many crowns had already begun to rust from within? In the aftermath of hidden rot came another silence, more suffocating than disease itself: infertility. You walked through golden nurseries where cradles stood polished but empty, rocking gently in draughts that carried no laughter. The betrayal was not fever nor wound, but absence. A body that could not conceive, a womb that remained barren, became a weapon as fatal to dynasties as any assassin's blade. In courts obsessed with heirs, each failed pregnancy was a state affair, each stillborn child a funeral for a lineage yet unborn. Queens wept in secret, their tears staining silk pillows, while kings raged at their own impotence, blaming God, blaming wives, but never daring to confront the truth, that bloodlines, however divine they claimed to be, were as fragile as dust. Infertility was a ghost in every chamber, a whisper in every council. What happens when the crown has no successor? And thus dynasties crumbled, not by conquest, but by silence, the silence of wombs that never quickened, of futures that never drew breath. Every royal body was a battlefield, though no banners marked the war. You see it now: veins bursting, lungs collapsing, minds fracturing, as if destiny itself delighted in turning flesh against the crown. Thrones were carved from marble and gold, yet the rulers who sat upon them were made of trembling bone and fragile breath. What is sovereignty when the blood refuses to clot? What is divinity when madness whispers louder than prayer? Each monarch carried within them two kingdoms, the one they ruled and the one their body waged against itself. And more often than not, it was the body that prevailed. History remembers the wars, the treaties, the revolutions, but beneath those events lay hidden battles fought in sickbeds, in darkened chambers, where a cough or a bruise could decide the fate of empires. The body was never just a vessel. It was a traitor, a stage upon which power unraveled. And as the centuries turned, this truth became inescapable. Crowns were not toppled by armies alone, but by the silent rebellions of flesh. In Spain, the obsession with pure blood birthed not strength, but monsters carved by their own vanity. You picture the portraits: proud kings with swollen jaws, lips twisted, tongues too heavy to form words without effort. The infamous Habsburg jaw, grotesque proof of generations bound by marriage to their own kin, as if the crown feared dilution more than decay. Behind the velvet curtains, the deformity was no mere blemish. Chewing became torment, speech a labor, breathing itself a struggle. The body, once meant to symbolize divine right, had become a living mockery of that claim. Courtiers painted the jaw in flattering angles. Poets praised features that were in truth afflictions, but the truth seeped through. Each heir was weaker than the last, a lineage collapsing under the weight of its own arrogance. This was the cost of worshipping purity, children born not as saviors of dynasties, but as monuments to their ruin. The blood they guarded so jealously had turned against them, weaving deformity where they sought perfection. The Habsburgs learned too late what their portraits could not hide: that obsession with unbroken bloodlines creates heirs already broken. Powdered wigs, painted cheeks, and silken robes, all masks meant to disguise the rot beneath. You see the portraits, monarchs frozen in eternal youth, their eyes bright with borrowed light, while in reality their bodies sagged, coughed, and trembled in secret. The court adored the illusion, for illusion was safer than truth. Behind closed doors, ulcers festered, bones weakened, lungs rattled in the dark. Yet when the curtain lifted, the king appeared divine, untouchable. Every public procession was theater, every smile a lie performed for the stability of the realm. Hypocrisy became policy, as if the mere appearance of health could hold back the tide of decay. What irony! Rulers proclaimed as immortal by divine right were in fact prisoners of failing flesh, terrified that a single revealed weakness could unmake their reign. So they powdered their faces whiter, hid their tremors beneath heavy robes, and posed for eternity in paint. But eternity could not erase the truth. Behind every immortal image was a mortal body already crumbling. Fear was the disease no physician could cure, and in royal courts it spread faster than any plague. You hear it in the whispers, who coughed at supper, who stumbled in the corridor, whose pallor hinted at weakness best concealed. Every gesture became a symptom, every silence an accusation. Servants carried rumors as swiftly as they carried trays, their words infecting the air more effectively than any fever. Ministers eyed one another not as allies, but as potential carriers of collapse. Even the monarch, wrapped in jewels, was watched for signs, a tremor of the hand, a falter in the voice, a breath drawn too shallow. Paranoia gnawed at the foundations of trust, turning courts into arenas of suspicion. The cough of a prince could shift alliances. The fainting of a queen could unravel treaties. Fear itself became contagious, a shadow that darkened every chamber, until no one knew which was more dangerous, the sickness in the body or the sickness it inspired in the mind. One by one, the crowns slipped, as if history itself had grown tired of their trembling heads. In Spain, heirs bled from veins too fragile to bear the weight of empire. In France, madness cracked the gilded mask of divinity. In Russia, the fate of an empire ebbed with the fragile pulse of a bleeding boy. In England, pale heirs wasted slowly, coughing their thrones away into lace handkerchiefs. It was not war alone that felled these dynasties, but the quiet conspiracies of flesh. Bodies betrayed titles, and lineages unraveled like thread pulled loose from royal tapestries. Each fall was not an isolated tragedy, but part of a pattern, dominoes collapsing in silence, each one foretelling the next. The illusion of eternity dissolved, revealing the truth. Crowns were never built of gold or iron, but of veins, lungs, and hearts that could fail at any moment. Dynasty after dynasty fell, not in sudden catastrophe, but in slow, inevitable collapse, as if history itself was whispering, "Power is always mortal." The halls that once echoed with coronations now stand in silence. You see the thrones, carved, gilded, towering, yet empty, their cushions collecting dust, their glory fading into shadow. Illness had not only claimed kings and queens, it had erased their very legacies, leaving behind palaces that feel more like mausoleums. Curtains hang heavy, unmoved by the drafts that wander through abandoned corridors. Portraits stare down from the walls, faces once painted as immortal, now watching over nothing. The laughter of heirs, the bustle of courts, the sound of power itself, all gone, swallowed by the quiet left in disease's wake. An empty throne is more haunting than a toppled one. It is not the violence of revolution, but the stillness of absence, the reminder that bloodlines can vanish without a cry, without a final defense, undone not by enemies but by their own frailty. And in that silence, history whispers, even the mightiest crown can become nothing more than dust on forgotten velvet. History is often written in the language of battles and treaties, yet beneath the noise of cannons lay a quieter hand, disease, the true editor of empires. You begin to see it, fevers that halted campaigns, bleeding heirs that rewrote successions, madness that fractured authority. The quills of historians may trace maps and crowns, but it was sickness that determined where those lines would break. What general could conquer what a cough had already undone? What alliance could survive the death of a single fragile child? Armies marched, revolutions roared, but illness bent the course of nations with nothing more than a shiver in the blood. It is a truth both awe-inspiring and dreadful. that the destinies of millions were redirected not by the strength of kings, but by the weakness of their flesh. And as you look back through the ruins of dynasties, you cannot escape the realization. Disease was not merely a shadow of history, but its hidden hand, always writing. ChatGPT said, "They wrapped themselves in ermine, crowned their brows with gold, and declared themselves chosen by God. Yet beneath the velvet and jewels, their bodies betrayed them just as any peasants would." The illusion of invincibility was the monarchy's greatest performance, and its cruelest lie. Versailles, El Escorial, the Winter Palace, all were monuments to permanence. Yet within their chambers rulers coughed blood, bled endlessly, slipped into madness. Wealth could not close wounds. Power could not silence fevers. Prayers could not banish the shadow of inherited rot. What greater irony than kings who ruled armies yet could not conquer their own selves? What greater tragedy than dynasties that built empires only to see them crumble because of a single weakness in the flesh? The crowns gleamed as though eternal, but every coronation was already haunted by the grave. Disease stripped away the illusion, reminding even the mightiest. Thrones were wood, crowns were metal, and bodies were fragile dust. You cough in the night, and for a moment, the centuries collapse. That sound, raw, human, unremarkable, once echoed in palaces. Kings doubled over in velvet chambers, queens pressing lace to their lips, blood blooming through the fabric. Your body is not separate from theirs. It never was. They wanted you to believe they were chosen, different, exalted above the common tide of flesh. But the truth is simpler, crueler. Veins do not recognize crowns, lungs do not respect lineage, bones do not care for banners. The weakness that hollowed out empires is the same fragility that moves through you now. There is no royal disease and common disease. There is only the body, in its staggering brilliance and its quiet betrayals. Their thrones may be gone, their portraits fading, but their mortality is yours. You inherit it every time your pulse quickens, every time your breath falters. In the end, history was not their curse alone. It is ours. History remembers the battles, the banners, the treaties signed with trembling hands. But beneath it all, the quiet truth lingers. It was not swords that toppled dynasties, but veins that split too easily, lungs that drowned in their own shadows, minds that slipped into madness. Thrones fell not in firestorms of revolution, but in the slow suffocation of breath, in the bleeding of a child, in the silence of a barren cradle. This is the lesson time refuses to let us escape. Fragility is the crown we all inherit. No gold circlet, no jeweled scepter, no marble hall can shield the body from itself. The empires that imagined themselves eternal were undone by what lived within their own blood. And so, the true conqueror of kings was never a rival army. It was mortality itself. Perhaps that is why silence clings to the ruins of palaces. Not the silence of victory, nor of peace, but of endings too delicate to announce themselves. Dust on a throne, echoes in a corridor, portraits staring back with eyes that remind us they were fragile. We are fragile, and fragility is forever.